Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Parking Revolution Housing Solution webinar. My name is Zach Deitz-Gross. I'm the Policy Director at Transform. Next slide. Transform promotes walkable communities with excellent transportation options to connect people of all incomes to opportunity, to make California affordable, and to help solve the climate crisis. We're here today because we know that the Bay Area is not an affordable place to live. Without more housing, especially affordable housing with easy access to nearby amenities, the region's problems of displacement, homelessness, and long commutes with their associated pollution will get worse. We also know that one of the biggest constraints on building new housing is excessive parking requirements. Last year, Transform weighed in on 30 housing elements in the Bay Area, getting 18 cities to make real commitments to reform disruptive parking practices that limit our housing goals. We're excited to share the findings of this work with you today in our report, Parking Revolution Housing Solution, and to bring together partners in the affordable housing world to talk about a host of policies and practice that can help galvanize parking reform and spur more affordable housing development in the Bay Area. Next slide. Our floor plan for today's webinar will have Transform's Housing Policy Manager, Gracia Mana Ayon, share a high-level overview of our report and delve into why the time for parking reform is now. Then we'll bring in Marlene Salazar, Senior Program Officer at Enterprise Community Partners, to talk about financial incentives for smart parking. And finally, Sam Moss, Executive Director of Mission Housing, will give us a real-world example of smart parking in practice. We'll also have time for Q&A, so please put your questions in using the Q&A feature, and we'll ask them at the end of the panelists. And with that, I'll turn it over to Gracia.
Great. Thank you, Zach. Hi, everyone. I'm excited to be here with you all today. My name is Gracia Mana Ayon. I am the Housing Policy Manager for Transform, and I'll be speaking today on the critical moment that we are in as it relates to housing, parking, and land use. Right now in the Bay Area, many jurisdictions have finalized and adopted their housing elements, but many are still in the process. As part of this process, cities and counties had to analyze the role parking policies were playing in constraining housing. So this presents a twofold opportunity. One, to influence jurisdictions to commit to housing-friendly parking policies if they are still finalizing their housing elements. And two, to hold the jurisdictions who have already made these commitments accountable and following through. Most have already committed to updating their parking codes by 2024, and some are already doing so. And as my colleague mentioned previously, the Bay Area is required to produce over 400,000 more homes by 2031. I know that we have all heard this number many times, and we all know that we are nowhere near meeting this goal at our current pace. And to be able to get there, we need every tool possible. We at Transform have been working on parking and land-related issues since 2005. And although much progress has been made, it remains true that we continue to hear how excessive parking mandates inhibit housing and other community amenities. But there is hope. State laws are already having a big impact. These include legislation that eliminates parking minimums near transit, shared parking, unbundling, and more. We will dive into these a little deeper later. Some great local examples of this in action is the city of Emeryville, which recently set parking maximums, and the city of San Jose, which has eliminated minimums across the entire city. So against this backdrop that I just painted, we released our Parking Revolution Housing Solution Report, a guide for how and why community members and housing leaders should engage in their local parking policies and advocate for ambitious solutions. This was released in July and authored by our very own founder, Stuart Cohen. In a nutshell, this guide discusses how revolutionizing parking rules would topple a major barrier to building more homes more affordably and in places that we all want them the most, walkable areas near transit. Together, I know that we can create a region with healthy, affordable, climate-friendly communities that help address racial and social inequity. So why are we so passionate about this issue here at Transform? We like this graph because it captures what we hear time and time again, which is that, once again, excessive parking requirements make construction much more expensive. It can make projects infeasible, especially on smaller parcels, and it usually results in fewer units. We also know that free parking encourages more driving and higher levels of climate emissions. So, in sum, parking is expensive to build. It leads to more costly homes. It takes up space. And we know through data that there's low vehicle ownership for very low income communities and for those that are part of supportive and senior groups. We all would benefit from living in walkable communities near transit, but especially these groups. So again, we have very ambitious RENA goals, and we need all the tools that we can to get there. And based on our work at Transform for over the last 20 years on parking, we have honed in on a few key strategies we believe are very effective in reforming parking. And I know a lot of you in the audience are developers, you're planners, these are not new to you. However, what is different in this moment in time is that jurisdictions used to restrict many of these strategies, but new laws are coming in that continue to make it easier to do the right thing and to incorporate these strategies from the planning stage. So just to name a few, reducing or eliminating parking minimums. AB 2097 eliminated minimum parking requirements for areas within a half mile from frequent transit. We then have setting parking maximums. More cities are setting parking maximums, and our next speaker will get deeper into why this is important. Shared parking. Recently passed AB 894 will allow private entities to share parking across California. And there are also emerging tools to help manage shared parking more efficiently, such as Parkade, which allows residents to rent and borrow parking spots through a user-friendly app. So unbundled parking. The just recently signed AB 1317 will require, as of 2025, unbundling for new developments in different counties throughout the state, including Alameda County and Santa Clara County. So that's pretty huge. And then, of course, transportation demand management. Programs that help lessen the need for more parking, such as transit passes, bike programs, and etc. There are a number of creative parking strategies that cities and counties are implementing now. And if you're curious for even more detail, you can always take a look at MTC's parking policy playbook. So what can we all do now in this pivotal moment? One is to learn what your jurisdiction is doing to reform parking, because many are doing it right now, and be a part of the process. Use the resources in our report to help advocate for these. Contact us at Transform if you need support, because that's what we do. And advocate for programs that will support implementation. So again, that looks like TDMs, in addition for advocating for smart parking policies and encouraging alternative modes of transportation. We want housing near transit, rich hubs, transit pass programs with minimal bureaucracy, and have access to tools that will help manage parking more efficiently. So we can all contribute to moving the dial towards more affordable homes and walkable, accessible neighborhoods for everyone. So here's what we know. The time to push the envelope for more homes and less cars is now. The opportunity is here. The legislation is here. We know that it matters, and we know that it's feasible, albeit very difficult, I understand. We have these housing elements being created and implemented, different funding available, and there will be a very important regional bond on the ballot next year. And so with that, I'm going to hand it to my colleague, Marlene Salazar, to dive deeper into a few of the funding opportunities.
Thank you, Grecia. Hi, everybody. My name is Marlene Salazar, and I am a Senior Program Officer at Enterprise Community Partners. I just wanted to give a bit of background of Enterprise. So Enterprise is a national affordable housing nonprofit organization dedicated to increasing housing with 40 years of experience. In our regional local office, we've been working on affordable housing and sustainable communities program applications since the program's inception in 2014. And we usually work on 2/3 of the winning applications in a typical year. We've become deeply involved in the program, and we have dedicated staff to it for most of the year. And we're located in all state regions, helping applicants in Southern California to the Central Valley. And I personally work on all the Bay Area applications. So today I will be providing an overview of the ASIC program and the transit-oriented communities policy and how they provide smart parking incentives. Next slide. So the Metropolitan Transportation Authority, MTC, is our regional planning transportation agency for the Bay Area. In 2005, MTC created its first transit-oriented development policy that set policies for land use surrounding stations where new and significant transit upgrades were planned. MTC started working on updating its transit-oriented communities policy that would replace the old TOD policy. After extensive stakeholder engagement, the policy was voted in by MTC last year. The TOC policy includes rules for how to make the best use of land that is near certain types of quality transit. More on that in a moment. And the ultimate aim of the TOC policy is to create a more equitable, affordable, and sustainable Bay Area. However, keep in mind that MTC does not have any authority over local land use, so implementation of the TOC policy will rely on a set of carrots and sticks to encourage localities to comply. For example, MTC controls significant local transportation funding that can be conditioned on compliance with the policy. We're at a critical moment where we have a good policy, but we need to make sure it is implemented well. It can have a big impact on our region, including how we can reimagine parking for better for everybody. Next slide. So the TOC policy applies to areas within a 1/2 mile of existing and planned fixed guideway transit stops and stations, which include regional rail, commuter rail, light rail, bus rapid, and ferry terminals. The TOC policy has 4 primary components. First, in order to demonstrate compliance with MTC's TOC policy requirements, you must meet the minimum average residential and commercial density requirements based on the level of transit service under the 4 tiers. Second, a jurisdiction must adopt at least 6 housing policies. These policies must be selected off a menu of choices. 2 policies for each of the 3 Ps, which are production, preservation, and tenant protections, and must adopt 1 policy related to commercial stabilization. Third, in coordination with transit agencies and stakeholders, a jurisdiction must complete an access gap analysis to ensure investments in bike, ped, and transit access. And lastly, you'll need to meet residential and commercial parking requirements based on the level of transit service classified under 4 tiers. Please note that there are no minimum parking requirements for tiers 1 to 3. Next slide. It is important to highlight the significance of the parking management objective outlined in the TOC policy. Parking standards are solely applicable to new developments and include maximum parking ratios for both residential and commercial development. And as previously stated, there are no parking minimums allowed for tiers 1 to 3. And in addition, jurisdictions must allow unbundled parking, allow shared parking between different uses, and at least secure 1 bike parking per space for every dwelling unit. Next slide. So what does the TOC policy mean for parking reform? The TOC policy will include financial incentives to improve parking policy near transit-rich areas. Cities that adhere to the TOC policy will receive priority when it comes to funding from the One Bay Area Grant Program. This program distributes approximately $100 million to annually support transit, reduce climate emissions, and promote sustainable growth in cities. If a jurisdiction doesn't commit to complying with the policy by 2026, MTC won't allocate funding for transit extensions to that city. The TOC policy is just one way that your local jurisdiction can get access to local regional funds and simultaneously support parking reform. So moving on to the Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities Program, also known as ASIC or AHC for some, builds healthier communities and protects the environment by increasing the supply of affordable places to live near jobs, stores, transit, and other daily needs. ASIC is one of the many California cap-and-trade programs, what we refer to as the California Climate Investment Program, and the program receives its revenue from quarterly auctions where pollution allowances are purchased. The revenue generated from those allowances is then funneled into the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. ASIC falls into the Sustainable Communities Clean and Transportation bucket. Next slide. So a major goal of the ASIC program is to reduce greenhouse gases by supporting transportation mode shift. ASIC is also a program about connections and how we can connect housing to jobs and other key destinations through sustainable transportation options through walking, transit, and biking. There is significant focus on reducing greenhouse gas emissions in the program. For example, 30% of your points are based on a project's greenhouse gas emissions reduction and efficiency ratio. And in the recent round, the winning projects will contribute to reducing approximately 800,000 greenhouse gases, primarily through investments in transportation improvements. Next slide. As such, it is strongly aligned with the efforts to help people avoid reliance on cars and the need for parking. For example, ASIC funds high-density housing near transit. It also funds public transportation, bike and pedestrian infrastructure, and other alternative mobility strategies. Unlike most of the other affordable housing funding sources, ASIC funding may not be used for parking construction costs. ASIC projects require a minimum of one secure bicycle parking spot per 2 units, aligned with the TOC policy of one spot per unit, and ASIC funds can be used to construct bike parking. Next slide. ASIC projects also are scored on how many GHG emissions they are reducing per ASIC dollar and the total number of emissions they are reducing. So in order to calculate your housing GHG emissions, you need to consider various housing inputs such as the total number of units, net density, and transit passes, just to name a few. And the GHG calculator also looks at the parking ratios. And if you have lower parking ratios, this may be used towards GHG emissions calculations and may help your project become more competitive. Next slide. Transit demand management strategies are an important part of avoiding reliance on cars and the need for parking. Additionally, it assists with adhering to the TOC policy, and specifically, a jurisdiction must implement at least one policy or program outlined in the MTC AVAX parking policy playbook to tackle transportation demand management. And that complement the policy's mandatory parking standards. So ASIC can help fund some of these TDM policies, such as free transit passes for residents and community members, wayfinding signage, including real-time departure information for both within housing and public spaces, bike parking, bike repair stations, bike share and car share programs, as well as bike ped and transit ridership education, and a lot more things. Next slide. So what does the ASIC program mean for parking reform? The ASIC program offers incentives for reducing greenhouse gases and helps affordable housing developers and localities comply with the TOC policy using state funds. It also specifically helps fund transportation demand management, which is a key parking strategy highlighted in Transform's Parking Revolution report and in the TOC policy. I really hope these program overviews were useful for you in your parking reform journey, and I will hand it over to Sam Moss from Mission Housing.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I think we can go to the next slide. Hello, everyone. Just real quick, thank you for having me. My name is Sam Moss. I'm the Executive Director of Mission Housing Development Corporation. We are a 52-year-old nonprofit, community-based organization creating and preserving high-quality, affordable housing and providing supportive services for residents of low and moderate incomes in the Mission District and throughout San Francisco. We've been building 100% affordable housing for decades, and recently, we built and completed 3 brand new affordable housing buildings, either right above or 1 block away from BART stations that have 0 parking. And I'm excited to tell everyone that the sun came up and the world didn't fall apart. I know it's crazy, but you have my word that that is the truth. Next slide, please. So, most specifically, we'll be talking about Kapuso at the Upper Yard today. It's a 131-unit building that Mission Housing just recently completed with Related Corporation that is directly above the Balboa BART station. What did we need to do? We needed to mitigate challenges. We lucked out in the sense that because of laws, which we'll talk about later, building 100% affordable housing, even though it doesn't have parking, as long as it's on land that is properly zoned, is now ministerial. Which means that it is not bound by discretionary review any longer, as long as the nonprofit affordable housing developer and its community and government partners have the courage to utilize the laws that exist. There's always going to be community resistance to 100% affordable housing, always. And one thing about Mission Housing is that it's not that we don't care about those people. Of course, we care about everyone, but we do not spend our emotional and mental capacity worrying about what a relatively ever smaller group of NIMBYs say about 100% affordable housing. And if you enter the development thinking in that regard, if you say to yourself, we're going to be for this building, we're going to organize the people who do support this with community engagement and using supportive legislation and policy, I think you'll find that you have a lot more energy to make these things happen. It can be a real it can be a soul-crushing experience trying to convince someone who doesn't want affordable housing that the right thing to do is to build it. And so, that's really our ethos, to be for things. Next slide, please. And so this is just, I think, a really great picture of the before and after of Kapuso at the Upper Yard. As you can see, so that the middle parking lot that's sandwiched between two freeways, basically, it was a longtime parking lot for MTA and BART employees. And then in something that I can't believe we still use in the year of our Lord 2023, there was a kiss and ride drop-off point, which is the road that leads. I wish I could have my pointer, sorry, but the Balboa BART station, we're told, is one of the most utilized BART stations for commuters getting dropped off and then taking BART to somewhere in the Bay Area in the whole system. So in 2021, we broke ground on the 131 units with Related. And in 2023, we actually just recently had our ribbon cutting, and we are almost fully leased up. What this picture doesn't show is that through our ASIC funds, we also built a brand new, fully open to the public 24 hours a day BART Plaza that has a coffee shop, restaurant that opens up to it from the building, and is just really awesome. I think the one great thing about using ASIC, if you can do it, is that it really does enhance the overall experience in and around affordable housing buildings for not just the people that live there, but for those that live in the surrounding areas. Though those people way up on top of the hill in those single family homes might believe they didn't want this building, Mission Housing is very confident that in a year or two, they too will be enjoying the parties and festivities we have on the BART Plaza. And, I really want to stress that this was only made possible because individuals such as yourselves that are here today supported, we go to the next slide, supported things like SB 35. SB 35, these bills that make affordable housing ministerial, give the affordable housing developer the confidence and ability to get things done and not get bogged down in, as I said, the relatively small amount of people who don't want parking. But I do want to take a step back and stress that Mission can do this because we build near 16th and Mission BART, because we build at the Kapuso Upper Yard. We have public transportation infrastructure. We have we have lots of organizations in San Francisco that don't believe you need a 2-ton death machine to solve your family problems. So I know that that's not how it always is in the East Bay, in the South Bay, up in Marin in the North Bay. But I do believe that our industry, the nonprofit affordable housing industry, is in a unique position where we are extremely qualified to not only build this housing, but coordinate the infrastructure that's needed to come with housing if you don't build parking. Our bread and butter is coordinating multiple levels of bureaucracy, all at the state, local, and federal at the same time, while we also get private investment for what end up being $100 million affordable housing developments. We build trust with not only our lenders and our community partners, but our government agencies that we work with. We also provide resources to our tenants. We make sure that every single one of our underage tenants and every single one of our senior tenants has a free Muni Pass. We have monthly meetings, and every monthly meeting at all of our buildings that don't have parking have a section where we ask everyone, are you getting around okay? Do you need help solving your problems of the day, even if it's just going to a doctor or the grocery store? We bring things to the building that many people believe you need a car to solve, such as physical and mental health practitioners once a week. We have a food pantry at our buildings once a week, where more than just staples, but also protein, vegetables, things like that are given to every tenant. And it's not a perfect world. Individuals still need to park, and we know that we're not, going to get there where 100% of our tenants don't need parking, but I can say with absolute certainty that even at our buildings with parking, over the last 10 years, we've had less and less of our tenants want a parking spot. We do not have any 100% full parking garages under our buildings in San Francisco, and we haven't for many years, almost as many as I've been the executive director, which is 10 years. And so Kapuso, we think, is a real win. Not just because it's 131 units of affordable housing, but also because We never considered parking ever. We knew that having parking would reduce the number of units we could build. If we had built a even 0.25 parking spaces to units at Capuzzo, we would have, instead of had 131 units, been closer to about 95. That's just the cost benefit analysis here. We're talking about dozens of low-income people from San Francisco and the Bay Area that would not be living in a high-quality home right now so that we could house cars. And that is just not something that Mission Housing is willing to accept anymore. And again, I know that we can do that because of the city that we're in, but we are confident that if the rest of the nonprofit affordable housing industry takes that ethos whenever they can, right? I know that it's not always possible, that little by little we can get there and we can maximize what are a high number of, look, when you say you build $100 million for a building, like, of course, that's a lot of money, but it's nowhere near the amount of resources that we actually need. We need like $11 gazillion right now to build all the affordable housing that the California needs. And to obtain that, we'll need to stop wasting it on parking. And so you can go to the next slide. And I just, if you want to follow us, please do. We're happy to answer questions. And I want to thank Transform again for inviting me to this. I myself am about to have my second son. My wife, Laura, who runs MB Action, has epilepsy and can't drive. I have not driven in 15 years. We live in the Castro. My parents live on the north side of the city, and we manage to live our lives every day without a car. And it's while it takes a little bit more planning, I am here to also say that it's possible. So thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Sam, Marlene, and Gracia. So I think we're going to turn it over to Q&A. And so a reminder for folks who put their questions in the chat. I already see a couple popping up. But we'll start just with one that I have for the group, which is, what is one thing you wish people understood better about the connection between parking and housing? Sam, why don't we start with you?
I'm so sorry. My internet's a little bit. Can you repeat?
What is one thing you wish folks understood better about the connection between parking and housing?
Like I just said recently, it's not a specific. I mean, it's essentially a one-for-one trade. If you want to build a parking spot, especially in below grade parking, it's essentially a unit of affordable housing that you're not building. It might not be a complete dollar for dollar, but we're also talking about space and infrastructure that you're taking away from what could be either another unit or ground floor community serving spaces. And so there's a real world cost to saying that you need more parking. And that is low income individuals, seniors, families, formerly homeless individuals not having a home. And I just don't think that that's cool. So I wish more people realize that.
Marlene, Gracia, what's one thing you wish people knew more?
What I have come to realize throughout my career working in affordable housing is that when preserving or building new housing, the fear of parking issues is weaponized to try to stop the creation of these buildings or the preservation. And I think that we are in a moment where that is becoming less acceptable, and that there are tools because, as Sam mentioned, it goes beyond the parcel. And I think that we can all my hopes are that we can all come together to figure out like what needs to happen beyond the parcel so that people can live without a car and have a high quality of life, because they are unfortunately very connected. And we have really big, lofty goals to meet, and we're going to need a lot of tools. And this is just one of them.
Yeah, and just to add a little bit to what Gracia and Sam mentioned is that there are some tools that exist already to help fund these projects. ASIC again is a great example. The TOC policy is another great example of this. And so, but we definitely need more to kind of help impact. And I think the ASIC program in particularly thinks about beyond the parcel. And you're required to have, to get additional points to become competitive to have, biking and pedestrian improvements all within a 1 mile radius of the housing site, and all of your improvements, your local transit improvements, all have to be within that 1 mile. So that way there's a direct correlation between the folks that are living there and are, walking in their neighborhood. And so I think it's a great program to really drive in that message.
Thanks. And I also want to welcome Transform's founder, former executive director, and the report author, Stuart Cohen, to our webinar. So, Stuart, do you want to answer the question of one thing you wish people got more about the connection between housing and parking?
I think it's really been said well, but I do want to kind of put a pin in what Sam said about the loss of ground floor uses, which is something that people have just started to take for granted. And there are some buildings like Midpen has an excellent one in San Mateo County where they put in childcare on the ground floor. And it doesn't just provide a great amenity for people in the building and the community, it enlivens the whole space. And they put a little playground outside. All of this is kind of where parking typically would have been in a building because they wouldn't have gone underground there. And it becomes a community amenity for people walking by. It kind of, and so I think, all housing, but especially affordable housing that's getting public subsidy, kind of should try to take it, as far as we could. Like Sam said, not all of them can go to zero, but to really go down as far as you can.
And if it's okay, because we talked about Capuzzo, I want to add. So Capuzzo has a 6,000 square foot YMCA-led childcare facility for about 55 to 60 students. We have a nonprofit space called Bicis de Pueblo, which is run by Poder, a longtime environmental justice firm that teaches our low-income youth not only about bike maintenance and safety, but how to run a bike shop, which will be run out of Capuzzo. We have Youth Art Exchange, which got a space on our ground floor, which works with San Francisco Unified Children for after-school care based on not just art, but things like architecture, urban planning, but also screen printing and skateboarding and everything. They'll be able to serve 25 to 30 kids every day. And then we have a longtime Mission Cafe that wanted to expand to the Excelsior called Breakfast Little, which I personally think make the best breakfast burritos in San Francisco. That also got space because we didn't build parking. So I just, Stuart, you're totally right. Just environmentally, it's more friendly. We're not doing the cars. And so the building really wouldn't have been as good with parking. Sorry to butt in. I'll shut up.
No, that's great. So Betsy asks, a friend moved into a new affordable transportation apartment a few years ago, and it took management about a year to coordinate and issue the promised transit passes. So how do we ensure that if we're reducing parking, we're getting the TDM options to residents to ensure that they have that same or better access, even though it's not through cars? Sam, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I feel like I'm taking up all the oxygen, but so one thing that would be great is if ASIC would be better repaying the nonprofit affordable developer money that it fronts. ASIC is extremely frustrating when it comes to uploading invoices that have already been paid. And I think there's a real world where either the San Francisco's Mayor's Office of Housing would increase the gap funding, or the nonprofit affordable developer could simply, out of our own funds, if not a whole year, a significant number of months where we could just pay for the transit passes to get them going until the ASIC funds come in. I think it's a really good example of a well-intentioned policy that has unfortunate real-world consequences. That is, it's the same with us. When we opened 1950 Mission, it took approximately a year to get our transit passes approved. And even then, Bridge Housing and Mission Housing had to pony up some money that we'll never get paid back for. But if the nonprofit knew that there was a fund from HCD or just directly from ASIC that would repay us, I guarantee you that a lot of us would just go ahead and do that, because tenants that have transportation options, happy tenant, a tenant that is excited about programs from our buildings, that makes it easier to run our buildings. It brings our operating costs down. It brings our unforeseen bad circumstances down. And so that would be my main suggestion in terms of policy reform.
Stuart?
And Zach, I just have to say that this is something that, cities have always looked to build infrastructure, add transit as a way to deal with their transportation problems. But TDM, these demand management programs, are ultimately the most efficient thing because they just help reduce both trips and cars. And so some cities are realizing this and putting resources towards first mandating some of these programs. And so San Jose, which recently got rid of parking minimums and requires, they have a menu of TDMs that you have to choose from. They're going to require annual reporting, and they're going to have people following up to see that they're being implemented. And so it just takes some resources, on the city's part to really demand they happen.
And I would just add, as Sam mentioned too, like it also takes effective outreach. And point of the work Transform does at mobility hubs, where we do active like events to help folks get access to things like AC Transit Easy Passes, to understand what are the transit or transportation priorities for residents on the ground. Are they EV car share? Are they scooters? Are they transit passes? And really cater to their needs. So I think it also starts with understanding where residents are at, bringing resources to the table, and then doing the work, both on the procedural and bureaucratic side, but then also just the outreach and community engagement that is essential to ensuring strong access to these programs. Great. So I think Libby seems sold on the connection between less parking, more affordable housing, but is frustrated that we haven't gotten many enviros involved on this. How can we help share more kind of the environmental connection to build a stronger, wider coalition to advance these priorities?
So I can take a first pass at that. Yes, that does definitely sound like a missed opportunity. I will say, from what I know about environmental groups, data, I mean, the data is out there. Like the information is out there. I think we just have to make the connections for our partners out there in the environmental groups, because there is already data that demonstrates that people who live near transportation, when people live near transportation and use their car and they don't have to do lengthy commutes from like the far East Bay into more of like maybe like Oakland or in San Francisco, it equals less greenhouse gas. This greenhouse gas emissions. It is a fact. So I think this is maybe a question of like, how do we bridge that gap to bring them along with us and show that that this very much not only is a housing solution, it's also a climate solution.
Yeah, and if I can just jump. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Sam. I know you had your hand raised.
Go, please.
Oh, okay. I mean, I think the ASIC program, for example, you have to submit a GHG calculator that includes your housing, your after transportation scope of work, your transportation scope of work. So, and it all calculates like how many greenhouse gases you're reducing. So there's a direct connection by what you're investing and how much you're reducing greenhouse gas as a result. And we see the impact by projects like out in San Francisco, for example, that you have more options, transportation options as a result, because you're either purchasing new BART cars to help increase ridership.
And I think it'd be great if more environmental groups got on board, but just to play devil's advocate, like the parade has been created and we're marching away. And if they don't want to get on board with doing the right thing, then I also just want to caution everyone about trying to get all the Sierra clubs of the world to like affordable housing, or, trying to get it. Unfortunately, environmentalism does have a history of preservation over new development. And I know that those habits can be hard to break. And it's not that I think we should be antagonistic, but I do think we should. I have had a lot of results in letting them yell at me and then saying, well, I'm sorry, but the law exists and we're going to build this thing. I would love it if you would be there at the groundbreaking, but mea culpa if not, because I think we get bogged down way too much trying to make the tent as big as possible before we take off. And with our housing element and our housing crisis, we just can't afford to do that.
Thanks, y'all. And I would just also say that, Gracia, to your point about data, like Transform has our Green Trip Connect tool, which allows you to, anyone can plug in an address and understand exactly what the climate and environmental benefits are about building housing, and especially affordable housing in locations near transit, and really being able to make the case for reduced VMT, reduced GHG emissions, and cost savings for folks. So I think that like not only tools out there, but like we want to just give those tools to the people. And I think letting the Sierra Clubs of the world play with Green Trip could be a great way to show them and empower them to be advocates for these things. So one other question that came up is that, and naming just that many low-income communities of color feel differently about having a car. So what are some ways we can kind of mend or bridge the different ideologies of the residents we're trying to serve? Gracie, do you want to kick us off here?
I do. I really appreciate this question actually because it's very real. Um, I am from an immigrant Latino community in the Los Angeles County, North Hollywood. We had one bus line. So we needed our car. Uh, I was not of the mind at the time that we could survive without one. And I completely understand the sentiment that it feels like within my community and other communities of color, the vision of living without a car and a connected community is for privileged white people, and I'm never going to have that. What I think would be a beginning to bridging this gap is what Sam mentioned is to be beginning with building trust. We have to be able to demonstrate to people that they can have their high quality of life and have what they need if they're able to live in areas that are walkable, that have transit, that they have the TDMs. We have to build that trust first. I think that there's work for all of us to do for us to get there and to bring everyone along. And I will also say that I personally am not of the mind that like I would sit there and tell people you need to give up all of your cars starting today. If we can move people from having like two cars to living with one car, that is progress. And so I think it is building trust. I think it's demonstrating to people that that they can have what they need and making sure this is a reality for them. And moving the dial.
Thanks, Gracie. Sam?
Yeah, and I completely agree, Gracia. And I fall victim to this because I hate cars. And I can be really like, oh, no cars, they suck. Let's get rid of them, and that's just not fair to society because, to be frank, until this moment, we have made most of our societal decisions based on where the cars are going to go and how fast they're going to drive by, even in cities like San Francisco. And so, like Gracia said, you really gotta meet the tenants where they are, and you need empathy. Empathy is always Mission Housing's most important currency that we use when we're trying to get hearts and minds to agree with us. And so we are always trying to be solutions based. If you're in a building that doesn't have parking and you need to get somewhere once a week that's all the way across town, or you need to get out of the city, then that's a real problem. And there have been times when Mission has helped people find parking spots. There's been times where we have looked at the rent they're paying, and maybe we could give them a $50 or $100 break so that they can go and pay for a monthly spot. These things they're kind of they're case based. It's not so much like a unilateral standard solutions, but the first thing is to respect the fact that these are real legitimate problems, and they need to be treated with respect and not reply guy disdain, if you know what I mean.
So just to quickly add, sometimes the infrastructure to walk and bike are not there, especially in communities of color. And so the expectation to rely on alternative mode shifts, if it's not there, then you rely on what you can have more accessible. And so I think that's why programs like ASIC, for example, like you really try to like address any like ADA issues or build out nearby like bicycle infrastructure to have that as an available option, because a lot of times communities just don't have ADA sidewalks and curb ramps along the path.
Thank you. And so Joshua asks, there is a housing measure potentially coming on the ballot in 2024. How does this connect to that, or how do you see this parking revolution housing solution connecting to a 2024 affordable housing measure in the Bay Area?
You mean the bond, yeah?
Yeah.
The bond.
I think that's what they're referring to.
I mean, it's vital. The amount of money that we're talking about will come with a lot of infrastructure work. It will come with a lot of partnering with ASIC. It'll come with a lot of private investment. And as I said earlier, I believe that the nonprofit affordable housing industry is the most qualified group to coordinate transit-oriented development, especially the transit part of the transit-oriented development. You know, the Capuzzo at the Upper Yard coordinated ASIC with BART, SFMTA, DPW, the San Francisco Mayor's Office of Housing, the San Francisco Housing Authority, and Mission Housing Development Corporation, and Wells Fargo. And Mission Housing was the group that was tasked with coordinating everyone and keeping everyone aimed in the right direction. And I think a $10 billion affordable housing bond is like Christmas and Hanukkah come early on the same day, because that's what we need. We need money. So it's great.
I would just add that, you know, one of Transform's priorities in passing the bond is also to ensure that the affordable housing that's built is in transit-rich areas, in high opportunity areas. The climate impact, the accessibility impact of the bond will be so enriched if we can make sure that we have the land use and transportation to support the affordable housing we know we need to build. So more on that, but
yeah. And Zach, I would just add that the report that we put out, the Parking Revolution Housing Solution, really calls out that now is the time for people to get engaged at the city level. And we've been working in a few cities. And while there's no more minimums near transit because of state law, that's a very small percentage of the buildable, developable land. And we've seen, you know, several cities not really wanting to reduce, you know, their parking minimums much outside of that. We're kind of dealing with Hayward right now, and even with the new law that passed that will require unbundling, they don't want to give any benefit, even though cities are going to have to unbundle and charge residents. They don't want to like lower the minimums, which makes no sense because it will reduce demand. So there's a lot that needs to happen, and it's, you know, a big point of this webinar is that there's a window because the housing elements were just passed, or most of them were passed, and these commitments were made. But from what we've seen, it's just kind of people are so busy that this parking reform is flying under the radar. So check in with, you know, your city and see when it's happening, or contact us, and let's take advantage of this opportunity. The more that we can have smart parking policy, getting back to kind of the question, the more units this bond is going to produce. Because like Sam clearly, you know, made out, every additional 0.25 you provide is going to mean, you know, fewer units, and so that's really the relationship to me between the bond and what we're talking about now of getting involved in parking reform.
Thanks, Stuart. So Jeff asks, how do we convince folks that housing without parking will attract people to the units? And there was another question similarly saying, how do we convince banks and lenders to finance multifamily projects without parking in suburban locations without comparable projects? So Gracie, I don't know if you want to answer the first part, and Sam, if you want to share some lessons learned from San Francisco.
Yeah. So what comes to mind for me is that this is somewhat of an advocacy issue, and that there's work to be done in terms of, it sounds like the question is specifically about lenders, and maybe not, I mean, your jurisdiction can also be your lender. But I think what we have found, you know, we worked with the city of Hayward. They were updating their parking policies, and we reviewed it and as part of their housing elements, and we provided some data that, you know, was very on hand for us in terms of how much less parking is used in developments that have supportive and senior housing. And that was enough for them to reduce when they brought it to their council or their board. That was enough for them to be able to lower it. And so there were, so I think what I'm trying to say is that there's this element of like education and advocacy that needs to happen to be able to, again, move the dial in suburban areas, because I don't think that tomorrow we're not in a world, or we're not in a place yet where we can build, where we're going to be able to build developments in very suburban areas with zero parking. But I think if we focus on moving the dial, we can make progress there.
That's well said. And I would say that lenders not being willing to give money if you don't build parking is based more on the fact that they think they'd be giving money to a project that could be sued for discretionary and be stopped by the residents, thus creating years and years of delay and maybe even a default in the loan. And that's not a world that we live in anymore. SB 35, SB 423, SB 4, AB 2162, a slew of numbers have been passed that make 100% affordable housing with enough supportive housing on site ministerial and hard stop. That's not to say that you don't need to be honest about where you're building and whether infrastructure exists or not. But if we're talking about convincing lenders to give money, I actually would go the other way. And once the lender finds out how much faster you can build if you utilize these bills that make affordable housing ministerial, and you're not going to be building that parking garage, which frankly just makes the building less good. It makes the health of the residents less good. It takes away infrastructure. You're going below grade most of the time, which has its own complications. So I would argue that lenders will be excited once local jurisdictions and nonprofit affordable developers just have the courage to utilize bills that have already been passed and are at their fingertips.
Thanks, y'all. So I think this webinar offered a lot of hope and kind of real-time ways to grapple with these things. And I think that's important, understand that we are still in a crisis, that we are in a housing and homelessness crisis. We are falling behind on our climate goals, and our transportation systems face fiscal cliffs that would impact our housing and land use and climate goals. So I want to end by asking you all one final question, which is, what gives you hope in your work as practitioners? What gives you hope? What inspires you that we can meet our goals, that we can have an equitable society, a thriving society, a dense, livable, walkable society for all? So yeah. Sam, you want to kick us off?
Sure. My hope is actually derived from how great it's been out organizing people who don't want affordable housing the last 10 years. We've got the Balboa Reservoir passed, which failed 3 times over 50 years. Capuzzo, the Upper Yard. Mission Housing was just awarded a site in Forest Hill, one of the most heavily segregated neighborhoods in the country. And the reason we're able to do this is because when we need to organize, when there is a community meeting, when there is a San Francisco Board of Supervisors meeting, I can get on the YIMBY Action Slack. I can call my friends at the Housing Action Coalition, and dozens and dozens of people show up and out-organize the people who don't want it. And it's really great to be for something. It's really great to just organize positivity and have that positivity help you out whenever you need it. And that really gives me hope, because it feels like we're moving in a positive direction instead of being reactive and defending ourselves when people should just be throwing us a parade because we're building affordable housing. And thank you for having me on this. I really appreciate it.
I think what gives me hope is that, I'm currently helping applicants for the upcoming Round 8 ASIC application, and I'm seeing the collaboration between transit agencies, cities, and developers, and everyone is trying to maximize their points, right? And so with that, it's like for a lot of those meetings, I'm like, hey, we need 2 miles of context-sensitive bikeway. And I'm seeing cities saying, okay, let me work on that. So because everyone is working together to make sure that we build affordable housing, but also provide the right infrastructure near there. And so it's beautiful seeing the collaboration and effort and hard work that everyone does for 6 months of intense collaboration to really help, try to build a sustainable community while also reducing greenhouse gases. So it's beautiful seeing the fostering of those relationships together.
Sometimes working in this field can feel like you're just like pushing a boulder up a hill. And I find myself coming back. I took a year away from to take care of family from this work, and I find myself coming back because the people who are dedicated to this work are so incredibly passionate. And what is giving me further hope is that the thought that everybody deserves shelter is becoming mainstream. It is becoming cool to believe that everybody deserves a home. And so I think with that, with it becoming mainstream, with more people believing that this is a human need and right, that we're going to get there.
And I'd say just really quickly that I am just shocked at some of these parking laws that got passed in the last couple of years, especially AB 2097. When I spoke to the sponsors, I was like, what are you guys going to bargain down to? This is never going to pass. That they're going to just like ban minimums near transit, across the state. And, and it passed, and then bundling is now going to be required in several counties, 17 to 25. So, and it's all because of, besides Donald Shoup, it's because of the housing crisis. And so I think the awareness of it, and that we need to use every single, possible solution is clear now.
Well, thank you all for those inspiring answers. We must do this. We must succeed, and I do have hope that we can, through our collective action, through our inspiration, by saying yes, and being bold in our goals. So I just want to thank you all, for our panelists, for your thoughts, your inspiration, for all the participants for joining today. I know we didn't get to all your questions, so please reach out to us. We'll send around follow-up email with ways to connect, around making an impact in your city, and anything else you want to work with us on to advance these goals. And I think I'll end in the immortal words of Donald Shoup, that it is unfair to have cities where parking is free for cars and housing is expensive for people.
Well said.
Thank you all for your time today.
Everybody.
Bye, all.